two speakers this morning from Microsoft. They're going to be talking about the Microsoft IT journey with Azure Logic Apps. Mayank Sharma is a program manager for enterprise cloud and integrations. Mayank has 15 years IT experience in product services and consulting. This has covered program management, technical architecture, solution design, and contract management. And he's joined on stage by Divya Swarnkar. She is a program manager in the enterprise platform services team, driving Microsoft's integration strategy and migration of integration services to the cloud. So Mayank and Divya, the stage is yours. Okay.
Thanks for the intro, Duncan. So me and Divya are part of Enterprise Platform Services. We basically own the integration space for Microsoft ID. So let's go to the agenda items for today. So we are going to cover integration landscape at Microsoft. Then we'll move to what are our motivators to move to PaaS, to Logic Apps. And then we'll cover where are we today and what next. Then I will hand it over to Divya to cover architecture and Logic App workflows. Then to business continuity and learning so far from our journey to Logic Apps. Okay, so let's get started. So as I mentioned, we own the integration landscape at Microsoft. We typically support all the business processes for Microsoft, be it supply chain, be it licensing, payroll, trade, and so on. So we have integration business flows for all these business processes. It's a very vast breadth of integration and business processes, and we are enabling digital supply chain for all these business processes, along with custom declarations and trade integrations for trade and finance. So let's talk about the scale. We basically support 1,000+ partners. It includes trading partners as well as our internal partners. 170 million plus messages flows to our platform per month. At the same time, we have 175 plus BizTalk servers, 200 plus LOB systems we integrate to, and we have 1,300 plus transforms through which we enable approximately 4,000 plus integration streams or transactions on these transforms. So we have a lot of reusable maps because of which we enable all these business processes. Through our integration platform, we process multi-billion-dollar banking and payroll transactions, majority of treasury transaction flows, which have, you can say, overall SLA of 10 minutes. And if it doesn't flow within 10 minutes, we have a lot of penalties. So we have very, very strict timelines and SLAs. Other than treasury transactions, we have SLAs for supply chain and volume licensing, which is basically 30 minutes. But during quarter ends and year ends, it comes down to 15 minutes. So in terms of message standards, we typically support all types of messages, be it traditional EDI, external EDI-FACT, XML, Swift, and Rosetta Net, XCBL orders, and BTF message standards as well. In terms of platform, we are multi-platform landscape. We have BTS 2016, Logic Apps, and soon we are going to retire MAPS, which is Azure BizTalk Services. As of now, this looks very simple, multi-platform, this box, but just few years back, we used to have BizTalk 2009, BizTalk 2010, BizTalk 2013. Within last couple of years, we retired all our legacy platforms and upgraded to BizTalk 2016. More or less, we are 100% on cloud, on IaaS plus PaaS. Last set of migrations are going on, so that we will be completely 100% on IaaS plus PaaS. So moving to what are our motivators to move to Logic Apps. Though yesterday we have covered all these items, Kevin and Jeff covered all those motivators. But for us, for IT, we are modernizing our integrations. We are moving away from file protocols, legacy patterns. Logic App brings us the flexibility and dynamic metadata-driven flows. So we have enabled all our patterns using this metadata-driven flows, which have reduced considerably our onboarding time, approximately by 50%. So which gives us a business agility to focus on our business needs instead of focusing too much on integration patterns. As well as it brings the serverless computing and managed services, which brings overall the supportability cost, as well as we can focus more on solving business problems, as managed services and serverless computing basically makes it easy. Secondly, I've already touched upon the cost factor. Logic Apps gives us the flexibility to control cost using consumption-based cost models. We don't have upfront cost or investment like on BizTalk Server, license as well as hardware cost. We have economy of scale. So based on our peak patterns and all, we can dynamically scale our Logic App patterns, compute. And next factor is basically our business continuity. Logic Apps gives us highly available environment across regions. And we have a DR story also, which we will discuss in detail in subsequent slides. Okay, so where are we today? Now onwards, we'll focus primarily on our Logic Apps releases, which we have done so far. Primarily, we had 3 releases. We have segregated our integration flows into patterns. So we identified the patterns on our Maps platform, and we identified these 3 releases. First release was primarily on AS2 X12 pattern. It was also driven by the fact X12 connectors were the first to be released by PG. So this was our first release where we onboarded our digital supply chain transactions and for volume licensing transactions for few partners. Our second release was AS2 EDI Fact release, which was release 1.5. On this release, we onboarded 100% custom declaration transactions so far. So all of our custom declaration transactions are on Logic Apps now. And our third release, which is going to be live next month, is release 2.0. It's basically non-EDI transactions, and we, as of now, because of freeze period, fiscal year freeze period, we are not live on this release. But after the freeze period, we'll be live with this release for our couple of partners which are still remaining on the maps. So after this release, we will be ready to retire maps. So as I said, we have enabled order to cash flow for volume licensing supply chain. All of our custom declaration trade transactions are running on EDI Fact. And we have enabled trade integrations flows also, which are integrating with our global trade systems. So so next month, after the release to go live, we will be ready to retire Microsoft Azure BizTalk services. Now I will hand it over to Divya to cover the architecture and design part.
Thank you. Thanks. Hello, everyone. So Mayank touched upon the complexity and scale of integration we have at Microsoft. And for these reasons, we have some core business goals. We have some core principles where we try to have minimal impact on our upstream and downstream partners and systems. And for these reasons, let me start with the end-to-end architecture that we have here. You probably are still seeing BizTalk Server here, which is to align with our principle to have minimal impact on our downstream partners. So BizTalk Server today in this architecture is used only as a proxy for connectivity purposes. All of our processing is now in Logic App workflows as shown in this architecture. So what we have here on the left side, we have our external partners who are sending requests to Microsoft. In the center, we have our B2B processing pipeline, which is completely in Azure. And on the right, we have our on-premise components, which are still in Corporate. So what we have here is a hybrid scenario. And as far as messaging goes, we receive requests from partner. It lands into our gateway, where we also store it in case any reprocessing is required within our platform, in case there are any issues. The request is then sent to the APIM, where we apply any policies if required, and then it is sent to our Logic App workflows into our Logic App processing pipeline, where the messages are being processed. After the processing is completed based on the line of business partners, the messages are routed via BizTalk Server on express route. So that's how the processing goes, but along with, for any complex system like this, apart from message processing, it's equally important to have a very a unified and cohesive way to manage and support the system. So as you can see here, we have all of the components in this pipeline are, we are enabling diagnostic information for them, and all of this goes into OMS, which is our central repository for all the diagnostics information. While for Logic Apps and integration account, this is a very native capability. For other components that you're seeing in the pipeline, we are using REST APIs provided on integration account to push the same tracking data into the OMS. And we are also pushing a unique correlation ID across the end-to-end pipeline, which allows us to then correlate and have the end-to-end view of the messages in the OMS. OMS is also, we are using OMS also as part of our monitoring strategy, where in case of any issues, in case of any failures, we have alerts written in OMS which notify us as well as our business in case there are any issues. The other strategy we are using for monitoring is leveraging synthetic transactions. So we have synthetic transactions that run into our production environment at a regular cadence, and we are leveraging those to basically get a unified view of our system and overall health of our end-to-end processing pipeline. So this is all about our end-to-end architecture. Let's look at how we are doing processing for B2B messages in the Logic App workflows itself. So what you see here is one pattern as an example for an order to invoice pattern, which is a very generic pattern in the world of B2B processing. And what we've done here is that we have segmented our Logic Apps into discrete and self-contained workflows, where each stage here is representing a very unique processing stage in the overall B2B processing. So for example, the first one is doing processing based on your communication protocol. The second stage is all about EDI processing. And the next, we do transformation, business processing as required. If you are someone who's coming from BizTalk world or Maps world, you can probably see a parallel here between the bridges and the pipelines you had in your previous systems. But one of the limitations in the legacy systems was that you had to replicate those pipelines and bridges for every partner, for every LOB that you were connecting to. But what we have here is we are using a native capability, a platform capability provided by Logic Apps team to enhance these workflows, which Mayank also called out in the beginning is metadata. So metadata is a feature that allows us to enrich the partner and agreement information with some specific details, and we are using that information at runtime to make processing decision in these workflows. So what I have here is a generic pattern. As long as a partner and LOB follows this pattern, we do not have to replicate these patterns for them. Once we have this, onboarding them simply is going to be a matter of doing some configuration changes. So I think this is a huge advancement in terms of where we are and why we are moving to Logic Apps. As Jim was mentioning in his keynote yesterday, it's all about business agility. It's all about empowering the business. So this is a great example where we have completely decoupled the platform work from the onboarding work. Our vision is that in future, where we want to see ourselves is that our partners need not come to us, need not come to platform team if they want to get onboarded to Microsoft's integration services. All they have to do is go to a website and provide their information, and they are good to go. So that's what our vision is. Today it seems impossible, but these are like limitless possibilities that we have with this architecture. Again, as I was mentioning, metadata is the key here, which is allowing us to make decisions at runtime in terms of what processing we want to do here. So since I'm talking so much about metadata, I'm going to show you a quick example of how this looks like. This is not all the metadata we have. This is just a subset of what we have to demonstrate how we are leveraging it at runtime. So the highlighted items here basically are actions in our Logic App workflows, and the information that the rest of the information is basically input parameters to those actions. So for example, if we may receive messages from our partners who may be using character set encoding that is different than UTF-8, and we may have to convert it to UTF-8. We make that decision at runtime based on the property in the metadata. Likewise, we have stages where we do property promotion before and after the transform. If we have those properties in the metadata at runtime, we are going to look at these properties, read the name of the property, use the XPath and promote them, and then we can use them for tracking purposes. For transformation, if the transformation is needed, we do that, but at the same time, the map name is coming from metadata. Again, this makes it very generic, independent, not tied to any specific partner. Line of business config is again our protocol to connect to our line of business applications, where we could have BizTalk, we could have something else, and all of this again is driven from the metadata. So just to see some of this in action, as we get a request from the APIM, APIM is where we also apply a lot of policies in terms of where the message goes. And once we do that, the next stage is our communication protocol processing. Based on the query string parameters, at APIM, we decide where to route it. From once the message is at AS2 processing, looking at the message, we decide whether it's an X12 or EDIFACT or XML message, and accordingly it goes to the next stage. In the next stage at EDIFACT, as I was showing you the example of character set encoding, we have a function here that looks at the message and decides whether it needs to do encoding, pre-encoding or not. The processing is again driven by metadata. Transform, again we use metadata to do property promotions. We use metadata to transform the message and all the values that are coming from there. Likewise, encoding and connecting to the adapter. So this is an example to also demonstrate the extensibility this kind of architecture provides us. As you can see here, in my previous slide, I had just one generic pattern. But as we keep growing our business, as we keep moving to Logic App platform, we can keep adding things like more communication protocols, more document processing protocols. And this would not require any changes to the existing flows we have, to the existing patterns we have. With the kind of business we are in, high impact, high risk business, we cannot take chances of having backward regressions. We have to make sure that none of our existing business is impacted as we are on our path of accelerated onboarding. Next, again with this architecture, what I want to highlight is for us, as we are on the path of enabling accelerated development and onboarding, we also need capabilities to do testing in production. And the reason, in order to do that, one is we need ability to have parallel workflows in production itself so that we can segment our traffic. We want, if we are making some big changes in the platform, we want to have the ability to, let's say, move 10% of our traffic to this new pipeline. And once we feel comfortable with it, we can move the entire 100% to the new set of changes. Because in our platform, as Mayank mentioned, we have treasury business running, which has tight SLAs, which has huge business impact. So we cannot put those kind of transactions right away into a high risk change. But things can always go wrong. So we also need the capability to fall back to last known good configuration, which is what this enables here. I have here two parallel flows everything is driven by policies that are defined in APIM, and we can just make the decision at runtime on what we want to, where we want to flow our messages. So we are, as you can see, by the name of the Logic Apps I have here, the way we are planning to enable this is by versioning our Logic Apps. And this may be an old news after session from Kevin yesterday, where we might be replacing this with drafts. So once we go back home, we'll have to again start having those conversations. So that's the beauty of a fast-moving platform. So for us, the kind of business we are in, business continuity is very important. And if you have a business where some downtime in Azure components can have impact on your business, then you probably also have to consider having your presence across multiple regions. And in our scenario, we have all of our resources both in multiple regions, where one of them is our primary and the other one is our secondary region. So what we have here just a step back, what I'm showing you here is only DR for Logic App workflows. We have DR for our end-to-end flows, but here I'm only focusing on the Logic App DR. And what you're seeing here is a primary region where all the resources are in active state, and then in the secondary region where most of our resources are in passive state. And under normal conditions, from the gateway, all of the traffic goes to the primary region. In case of, and we are deploying, and as we deploy and provision these workflows, we always make sure that both the primary and secondary region are continually in sync with each other, so that whenever we have to switch to secondary region, we don't have to worry about the synchronization at that part. But that's more of design time synchronization, but there is also synchronization needed at runtime, because we have B2B services like AS2, X12, and Edifact, which are stateful services. Their state is important for us to start or to resume business from the secondary region. And for this, product team has provided the capability to basically replicate your state from the primary region to the secondary region. And by state, all of the state is basically coming from integration account. So what we've done is, using the trigger and action provided by the platform team, we have 3 replication Logic Apps, each for a unique B2B protocol, AS2, X12, Edifact. And the trigger for each of these Logic Apps decides the interval, the frequency at which we want to replicate the 2 regions, and at which we want to synchronize the 2 regions. And the action basically does the act of pulling the state, the control numbers, the MIC values from integration account in primary to secondary region. So this is how it basically works. The messages go into the primary region, and the state gets replicated into the secondary region. In case there is a DR event, we have to basically do 3 things. We have to activate all the resources in the secondary region. As I mentioned, the trigger that we are using in the replication Logic Apps, we can define the interval at which we want to do the synchronization. So in the worst case scenario, the 2 regions may be out of state by that particular interval, which is why we always bump the control numbers in the secondary region by a fixed margin. And the third step would be to update the policy at the gateway to route it to the secondary region, and there you go, you're ready to move your traffic to secondary region. So it's all about business continuity. So next I want to share some of the learnings that we have gathered all these months working on the Logic App flows. And again, these are not things to do or not to do, but this is just what we've gathered over the period of time. So one of the things is As you're designing your workflows, it's important to understand that there are published limits for logic apps, and these are published on MSDN. Go and have a look at them and understand what they are and how it impacts your design and your workflows. As an example, there is a limit on the number of actions that can be executed in 5 minutes for a logic app. There is a limit on the number of calls you can make to external services from the logic app. There are limits around number of actions that can be defined in a workflow. So all these limits would help you decide how do you segment your logic apps, how do you basically design your workflows. Again, consider the nature of flows that you're creating. For example, in our cases, we have a very high throughput and high TPS scenario, but if you have something where you are writing long-running workflows, you may want to consider different design principles. In our case, we decided to use platform capabilities. We are going with a chained model. We are using workflow actions to call the logic apps because the response is quick. We do not have a dependency between caller and callee, and we get high throughput with that. But let's say you were calling an external service or you were calling something which takes days to complete, then you might choose to go with a webhook pattern or a controller pattern which gives you more control over the execution of these external processes. So if you have, so basically with this, like leverage the platform for concurrency. For example, both split-on and for each are platform capabilities to process messages concurrently. But what split-on provides you is that the action is not being considered in your count of the number of actions that you can execute in your 5-minute time window. Whereas with for each of those HTTP calls get counted towards your number of actions that you can execute in that 5-minute time window. So see how this is important for your workflows, what kind of processing you are doing, and make decisions accordingly, whether you would prefer to use split-on or for each. So again, look at what kind of workflows you have. Do you have single messages, or do you have messages where you have batched messages that get debatched after a certain stage? In our cases, we have both the scenarios. So we had to be very careful in designing the logic apps which get executed after the messages are debatched. So we had to make sure that those logic apps can handle the kind of volume that they'll be getting after the debatching of the messages. I did cover this in my previous slides, but is testing in production important for you? If it is, then you might want to consider a side-by-side strategy which allows you to do testing in production, but at the same time you have a fallback strategy if anything goes wrong. In logic app workflows, your delivery options are at least once or at most once. So as we've learned in distributed world, there is no concept of only once delivery. So as you're designing your workflows, think what is important for you. What at least once means is that you will have a guaranteed delivery of your messages once or more. What at most once is that you have a guaranteed delivery of your message once. So it could be 0 or 1. So think about what is important for you. Can you handle duplicate messages, or can you handle loss of messages? And based on that, make design decisions for your workflows. I think, so that's about it. I think that's all we had to share. We could not, there are probably many things that are important as if you are an enterprise customer and you're planning to move to logic apps or planning to move to cloud. We have taken a very phased approach here. We believe in doing things incrementally, learning over what we've done, and then making changes as we go. So if you have any questions for us, reach out to us. We have our distribution list DLID here. You can do that. We are also here. We have our architect here with us. We have members from our engineering team here if you have any specific questions on implementation, and we would be happy to answer those. Just a heads up, we also have a white paper coming in as soon as maybe end of this week or by next week, where we are covering all of what we covered here and more stuff in detail around how we have done the migration, how we are managing and supporting our platform. We also are going to have a couple of channel line videos coming in the next few weeks, and we'll share with the audience here on once we have them out. So before I wrap up, I just want to thank the Logic App team here and back home, because whatever we have done so far, it is the result of huge collaboration and huge support from the team here. And Jim, John Fancy, Kevin, we have been continually working with them, and they have been very helpful to us to make it happen, to help us reach here. The other thing that I do want to share is that even though we have the leverage of working so closely with them, but the way this team works is it's very data-driven, it's very customer-driven team. So we also go to user voice to put our feature requests. So I would encourage everyone here to do the same so that we can all push the team to deliver what we want. Thank you.